Let's talk the Cardinals starting rotation and whether Andre Pallante is guaranteed a spot in it. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It's Sunday evening, March 9th, 2025, and we're talking St. Louis Cardinals baseball tonight. Going to focus in on the rotation and an interesting projection by Katie Woo of The Athletic that has sort of inspired some conversation surrounding the Cardinals rotation and Andre Pallante, whether he's guaranteed to be in it or not. And, of course, he pitched Sunday as well, but didn't pitch as well as he probably would have wanted to, especially with this conversation now bubbling to the surface following Katie's roster projection that she did for The Athletic a few days ago. So we're going to dive right into it, and I'll give you my opinion and thoughts on what all of this entails and try to tell you where I think things could be heading. Definitely some murkiness, though, to the situation. And I think this was exacerbated a bit by Pallante's performance on Sunday. And I would hope that the Cardinals wouldn't take one effort like this one and say, oh, that reinforces our belief that Pallante's spot should be in question, if they had felt that internally on some level. And it's not that I think that this was really something bubbling to the surface previously, and maybe still it's a long shot, sort of far-fetched thing to actually happen, that Pallante would lose his rotation spot. But it is interesting. Katie Woo is obviously very, very plugged in with the great job that she does covering the Cardinals for The Athletic. And so when she put this article out the other day for the Athletic website, the Cardinals opening day roster projection 1.0, how center field battle and bullpen will impact decisions, she had an interesting tidbit in there where she considered the three starters that you know are locked in, which is Sonny Gray, Miles Mikolas, and Eric Fetty. Those guys are on the roster and they're healthy. They're going to be in that rotation. Those are the locks. And she labeled Steven Matz as the most likely category. She did 3 categories for this, and Matz was most likely in a rotation spot. But then the big question marks were the final 2 pitchers that are ostensibly competing for a spot, which at this point is McGreevy, Michael McGreevy, and Andre Pallante. But we maybe didn't really think Pallante was competing for a spot in the rotation. I think the way that we had approached it the entire offseason was that he was going to be in that rotation after he had stood out from the pack at the end of last season. I mean, once he joined the rotation in that role last year, he was as good as anybody in the rotation for the Cardinals. So could spring performance dictate that maybe the Cardinals would turn their back on something like that after he really went a long way to bail out what they were trying to do last summer when he just kind of came out of nowhere? The Cardinals didn't expect that. They didn't see that coming. When they sent him down in late April or wherever that was, after he had struggled in relief, he was in a bullpen role to begin the season and didn't pitch well. It was one of those deals where they kind of said, yeah, you can be a starter in Memphis. I mean, that's fine. And it resurrected his career. I don't think that was something where they were really driving the bus on just going, oh, this is how we're going to fix you. It was really him kind of taking the bull by the horns and trying to dictate the situation a bit and say, I think I can work on some things in a starting role and become a better version of myself. And that's exactly what he did, and showed it down the stretch with an ERA in the low 3s as a starter for the remainder of that season. But now it's a situation where the Cardinals have veterans in their rotation. As much as we talk about the runway that we'd like to see for young players on this team, Sonny Gray is a veteran, Eric Fetty is a veteran, Miles Mikolas is a veteran, Steven Matz is a veteran. Those 4 guys are going to be in there. And I have been kind of beating the drum for the idea that if Mikolas and or Matz should struggle, the Cardinals should have a quicker hook this year with them than they would have in any other season, because they're in the final year of their contracts, and it's just a hard thing to imagine them coming back in 2026. Like, they're on the way out. Eric Fetty probably on the way out as well, pending what the Cardinals want to do with some contracts next offseason. They have kicked every single can down the road that you could possibly kick by not extending anybody, by taking some of those guys that you thought would maybe be extension candidates, early extension candidates, to arbitration. And then on the pitching front, you've got 3 expiring contracts in your, what we presume to be your opening day rotation. So a lot of things are going to change. But the reason that I think you can get away with that when it comes to guys like Matz and Mikolas, and look, I think Fetty is a notch above the other two just in terms of what our expected performance from him is, because he was much better last year, had an ERA of 3.72 with the Cardinals, and people kind of remember in their heads, they go, oh, Fetty wasn't really very good after the Cardinals acquired him last year. He wasn't as good as his numbers with the White Sox. He had a low 3s ERA, I believe, with Chicago, but with the Cardinals, he was very effective. 3.72, hard to shake a stick at that. I mean, that's just fine. If they had 5 guys doing that, I think the Cardinals would be in really good shape this year. So he did a nice job, and I think you can expect, at least on paper expectations going in, well, he didn't have an ERA over 5 like Matz and Michaelis last year, so yeah, I'll put him in a different category here. But with Michaelis and Matz, it's like, yeah, these guys are mainstays with the Cardinals, but if they struggle at the beginning of the year, I think if you have a quicker hook with them, especially in a case where Quinn Matthews is tearing up AAA, or let's say they keep Liberatore in a starting role and send him to Memphis so they can keep him stretched out, he'll probably end up in a multi-inning relief role in St. Louis. That would be the expectation, but let's say it goes differently and he's doing well in AAA. You're like, okay, this is somebody we got to get to the major league rotation really quickly here. McGreevy, like let's say they go with Pallante and McGreevy ends up starting in Memphis. So there are a number of guys, and we'll see Schaeffer is probably in that category too. Does he serve as a reliever for the Cardinals, or is he in the Memphis Redbirds rotation? And you can go on down the line at a number of guys that could be in play. These are decisions that have to be made, but they don't have to be made right now because you can put some of those guys in AAA. And I'm not talking about for the first half of the season. I really am talking about for the first 4 to 6 weeks. Let's say somehow this is the first season since I started covering the Cardinals that they get through spring and they have a completely healthy rotation. The 5 they wanted are the 5 they've got, and nobody got injured, which would be the first time since even in 2015 they didn't. I didn't start covering the Cardinals till 2016, but even in 2015 they had lost somebody. I think that was the year where they had just about everybody healthy all year long, but there was one starter, whether it was Waka or Jaime Garcia, that didn't get to 30 starts of their 5-man rotation. So they had a lot of consistency that year. It's really been since then. That's been a decade since we've seen the Cardinals go into a season where they didn't lose a starter for at least some period of time. It was Sonny Gray last year. Zach Thompson stepped in. Of course, he's hurt right now. And he doesn't count, though, because he wasn't very high up on the depth chart. But the Cardinals could kind of wade through those first 4 to 6 weeks, see how Matz is doing, see how Michaelis is doing. If they're doing well, great. The Cardinals are probably in a pretty good spot as a team with their record and their performance. If those guys aren't doing well, you have nothing binding them and you beyond 2025 in the month of September. Like, that's it. The binding is gone after that. So, considering you're in this transition year, you might as well just maybe cut ties a little bit sooner if the performance dictates it from either of those guys. And the guys that we've talked about stocking the Memphis rotation with, if they end up pitching really well in the month of April, early May, you go, okay, we've seen what we need to see. We gave the runway we wanted to give to some of the elder guys because, hey, if they're going to pitch, we're paying them anyway, and so they might as well pitch well if we're paying them to do it. But if they're not going to pitch well, we're paying them anyway. Yeah, but that's called sunk cost. We can go ahead and eat that, and unlike other seasons in recent memory, we do have a stockpile at AAA of guys performing. That's, of course, if that comes to fruition, where those AAA guys are actually performing. By the end of last year, and I was guilty of this a little bit myself, we were looking at the rotation and guys that were struggling in St. Louis and going, how can they not bring up another starter? How can they not? Well, you look in Memphis, there was nobody healthy. Like, the whole Memphis rotation was on the shelf later on in last season. So that situation being what it was, if it looks better this time and you get through the month of March and the month of April and you're healthy, you can start to talk about the luxury moves. It would be a luxury to say we're healthy enough that you can cut a starting pitcher that you're paying anyway, like Matz or Michaelis if they have an ERA of 5.8 through the first month of the season. That's really, I think, about the right length of a runway. We'll see if that should end up happening. But it's interesting that we're talking about Pallante here. I mean, Pallante was so good last year. Could this really be possible? Here's my perspective on this. And this is not me doubting Katie Wu in any regard, because, again, she is very, very, very plugged in and does a great job. This is her projection, though, right? This is her roster prediction. She's making a projection. She's not saying Pallante is going to be not on the starting rotation in the beginning of the season. Like, that's not what she said, look, I think it's more of a question that Pallante is than Matz is, because the Cardinals are going to defer to the veteran as they have done historically. Yes, they could put him in the bullpen, but close your eyes. Do you imagine the Cardinals putting Steven Matz in the bullpen? Just knowing that John Mozeliak is still in charge of this team, the way they've done things over the years, is it likely if Matz has a healthy spring and he does okay with his performance that they're going to say, yeah, we're going to put you in the bullpen? Because what putting him in the bullpen would do also is it would kind of cloud that bullpen with so many lefties where you go, you're not going to be able to take advantage of the Liberatore multi-inning relief weapon. Which, again, maybe his best role still is as a starter. But I think at this point, his best role is maybe to just make sure he's on the Cardinals. Even if that's in a relief role, just stick him to that relief role for the time being because you've got the starter depth in Memphis, I think, to withstand a couple of injuries in the rotation for St. Louis if that should come to pass. Let Libby be a weapon for you because he could be very versatile. I think he could be like a prime Andrew Miller as his ceiling if things could break right and he could keep that just bulldog mentality out there in the shorter bursts that they'll use him for. He's looked really good this spring, though. I'm eager to see Libby the next time we get a chance to look at him as it is. But I think it's kind of tricky to then put Matz out there because you got Libby, you got Joe Romero, and we know you got John King. I don't think they'll go 4 lefties, nor do I think they should. So, if you're not going to cut Matz, I think you do start Matz in the rotation. Honestly, what you probably do is send McGreevy to Memphis. And again, don't get your pitchforks out just yet. I think that's just kind of the move if everybody's healthy, which you don't expect to happen. There could be an injury on March 23rd, and suddenly this is not even a conversation anymore. But what I don't think you do is jack around Pallante again. After he came back from the depths of despair last season and you thought, man, his career might be over as a big leaguer. He was just getting shelled. It wasn't working in the bullpen. But what he was able to channel in the rotation is something that I don't want to yank that guy around and go, hey, you're not on the team. We already took your arbitration. You won your case against us, by the way. So now it looks kind of punitive if we send you down. I just think that it would be the pinnacle of overthinking something if the Cardinals go, hey, we're wanting to give runway, so we're going to put McGreevy in there over Pallante. Unless this notion of his lowered velocity is something. If there's something behind why Pallante is throwing 2 miles per hour slower on his fastball in spring. That's something that I do think is relevant. But in that case, what does that mean? He's probably injured. He's probably trying to pitch through something. You maybe put him on the quick 15-day IL and try to get that corrected. I wouldn't banish him to Memphis. I just don't think that's necessarily the right look. So, nor do I think it's called for based on performance. Like his numbers of spring was like a 3 ERA before Sunday. And we'll talk about Sunday. He gave up 8 hits. He gave up 2 home runs. He did get you through 4 innings, but I think he gave up, 4 earned runs in that game on Sunday. But he only walked 1 batter in those 4 innings. So that's not like the Pallante of the beginning of 2024 when the biggest problem was that he's a pitch-to-contact guy who was also walking the world. And you go, well, you can't put ducks on the pond and then say, let me pitch to contact. That's like playing Frogger on College Avenue in Columbia, Missouri before they put in the medians and made it so that you can't do that anymore. I think it's College. Yeah. Providence is on the other side. It's not a safe way to be living out there on the mound when you're a pitch to contact pitcher who's also going to load the bases up with a couple of dudes to just kind of make it more difficult on yourself. That ain't the way. That isn't the way. So I will say that for Pallante today, only walked 1 guy. Yeah, he gave up 2 home runs. Can't do that. Is it partially? But again, it's March 9th. Like in the same way that I'm going to defend Mason Wynn for being, hitting 111 or 150 or whatever it is, and the same way I'm going to defend Ciani for being 1 for 22, same way I defended Gorman. Well, maybe I didn't defend Gorman, but I said, let's wait. And, before we make these decisions about who's cooked and who's not cooked, it's early March. And then Gorman homered today. Burleson homered today. Matt Koperniak homered today. And Bernal also should have had a home run, but that big old tree out in center field reached up and took one away from him. One of the backup catchers, Bernal, good prospect as well on the way. And so, we're not going to overreact, I don't think, to 1 outing. But this is the kind of thing that can happen to Pallante. You can give up 8 hits, and 4 of those guys can end up scoring. But didn't walk a bunch of guys. You got to watch the velocity, though. That'll be where my defense of, hey, Cardinals, don't yank Pallante around again. Come on, don't be like that. That's my stance. I don't want to see that for Pallante. However, if there is a physical situation brewing with the lowered velocity, that's something you got to look into, and that would be maybe a reason to ease off of Pallante and try to figure that out before getting him back out there because you want him to be the best version of himself. The version that was throwing 94, 95 out of the rotation at times last year, when he was at his best. That's what the Cardinals would want to see from Pallante. So he was 69 pitches, 44 strikes, still pretty well in the zone. I mean, maybe 2 in the zone, right? Kind of the Miles Michaelis conundrum where he throws almost too many strikes, and then certainly in those 2-strike counts, throwing meatballs over the middle of the plate when you should theoretically be at the advantage as a pitcher. Those are the kinds of things that Michaelis has been burned by before. But Pallante, was not strong today, but I'll at least take that he wasn't walking the world. Let's see what it looks like the next time out, though. He's still being built up as if he's going to be the guy. Michael McGreevy threw 43 pitches. He was actually in relief of Pallante. He recorded 8 outs, 2 2/3 innings, gave up 1 run, and it was a homer as well. So if we're talking about a dead heat comparison, yes, Pallante's numbers for the spring are not nearly as strong as McGreevy's, but Pallante's been throwing more innings. He's been building up more. Let me check his overall numbers here for spring. I guess a 9 ERA, so he must have had another outing that is kind of escaping my memory that wasn't as strong. And McGreevy has looked good. I want both of them in the rotation. It's just one of those things where I thought we'd get to the end of spring and somebody would have gotten hurt, and we would lament that because you don't want to see anybody get hurt. But at the same time, you would go back and say, okay, this is your rotation now because of that injury. Like it all clarified. It crystallized itself. And we still could have that happen. It's March the 9th. It's not March 20th. There's a lot of runway to get through before the Cardinals can get into this season unscathed or minimally scathed by injury. And yeah, it was the first outing from Pallante that was a struggle, where he walked a couple of guys, gave up 4 earned runs in 1 inning because he gave up a bunch of hits. And yeah, when it's going 90 instead of 92, 93, 94, you're going to get squared up more often. So maybe that's the problem, and the Cardinals need to keep an eye on that velocity. March 4th, though, second start from Pallante, threw 3 innings, gave up 1 hit, no walks, 2 Ks. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm not going to overreact to a March 9th start. I hope the St. Louis Cardinals don't either. I'm pro Pallante. I am pro McGreevy. I'm also pro, let this play out. Don't look at Pallante and say, well, he's cooked because he had a bad spring outing. No. Now, if he's cooked because of the velocity thing, that's something that needs to be investigated by the team. And I'm sure they are on top of that, way more than we are out in the public. So I'm not panicking by any means, but it is notable that, Katie wrote this article before Pallante had the rough outing on Sunday when she made her projection. This was a couple of days ago. Considering it a question as to who's getting that last spot in the rotation. I'll read this from Katie's article, and I'll go ahead and link this in the video description so you guys check out the full thing from The Athletic. Pretty good insight. Assuming Matz is tabbed as a starter, what does it mean for Pallante and McGreevy? Pallante had a standout second-half performance last year and came in as a lock for a starting role, but McGreevy has been excellent. And the Cardinals want to see McGreevy as much as possible this year. There's been some talk about starting him in the bullpen in St. Louis. But that raises 2 questions. How McGreevy can continue establishing himself as a starter, and whether it's best for the club long-term as it tries to configure plans for 2026 and beyond. I'll answer it. Of course it's not best for the club long-term. Don't overthink this, Cardinals. Don't put McGreevy in the bullpen. It's the one guy that you don't start yanking around with these guys. Don't do Liberatore redux with Michael McGreevy. Just leave him in the rotation, which granted, he did pitch out of the bullpen in long relief last year. He was, I believe they said on the spring broadcast a week or so ago when he pitched last, before today, that he was the first in Cardinals history to earn a win in his first 2 career appearances, with one being a start and one being a relief appearance. And he was the winning pitcher in both. I don't think that had ever been done before McGreevy. I could be wrong, but it was something to that effect. But don't put McGreevy in the bullpen. Put him in Memphis, because one of 2 things is going to happen in April. And again, this is assuming everybody else is healthy, assuming that Pallante's issue with velocity right now is not health-related. If all that's the case, yes, I would put Pallante in the rotation because he carried you through a sea of broken glass in the middle of last season to get himself to a starter caliber level at the big league level, and he earned every penny that he won from you in arbitration with his performance down the stretch last year. Reward a player. Don't say a player is just forever in a doghouse and other guys get preferential treatment and that can't ever change. Let Pallante be one of the guys that you extend a little bit of latitude to at this point. That's what I would do after what he did for you last year. I think it just makes sense unless he's hurt, unless he's dealing with something, and that's why the velo's down. If that's the case, address that. Absolutely. Put him on the IL, whatever you have to do. And McGreevy gets the spot, and it's easy peasy, lemon squeezy. But if everybody's healthy, and Pallante's performance doesn't considerably regress, because if it does, then it's a different conversation. But right now, I haven't seen anything yet that I'm going, I'm alarmed. Like today was rough, but let's look at it again in 5 days. Let him get through a fifth inning next time, see what happens. Granted, if you want McGreevy to have that spot, he's got to throw more than 43 pitches too. Pallante is definitely more built up than McGreevy. Pretty soon you're going to get into that spot where it's every fifth day, and it's those regular season starters. You don't have innings for all this to be carrying 8-9 starters. This next week is going to be pretty prescriptive in that regard of who's part of that long-term, battle, taking it to the end to be built up as a starter, and who's into the bullpen mix, and who's just got to go to minor league camp because they got to get their innings so that they can get ready for the AAA rotation. Those decisions are coming. Already, they trimmed Quinn Matthews right away, and it's easier to understand now after a few more days have passed. It's like, yeah, they're trying to get McGreevy and Pallante innings along with the other guys that are locked into rotation spots, get them built up. It's a tricky time. There's only so many games, not too many split squads. So, those actually help the Cardinals a ton because it's more innings that you can get for these guys that are in competition with one another. And that was the case, 5-6 days ago was Pallante and McGreevy, who, by the way, cruel twist of fate. These guys are both UC Santa Barbara guys. I believe they were on the Santa Barbara team at the same time back when. And now they're purportedly competing for a rotation spot. I don't know, man. I don't see it. I don't see the Cardinals taking Pallante out unless a shift comes from the performance where the beginnings of a trend has shown with the velo dropping a bit and obviously getting hit around in 2 of the 3 efforts. If that continues, different conversation, I think. But if it levels out to any reasonable degree, the same that I'm not saying Gorman's got to show you a ton to just be kind of granted that opportunity to begin the year. I feel like the same should apply to Pallante. And as I began to say, one of 2 things is going to happen if you send McGreevy to the rotation in Memphis to begin the year. In the month of April, either somebody's going to get hurt, McGreevy's right up, or probably Michaelis and Matz, one of the 2 are going to struggle, and you can give that spot to McGreevy. And if you don't want to embarrass the guy, then put the struggling Michaelis or the struggling Matz on the 15-day IL at first to give him some time to work through some things. If you don't want to just cast him off into the ether, that's fine. And I'm not rooting for either of those things to happen either, by the way. I just think it's reasonable to say, act different this year, Cardinals. Let this be the year where you get, you get rid of a guy a week too early before giving him one last chance to beat the dead horse in the case where he's struggling. If somebody's started 4 times and he's got a 6 ERA, that's good enough for me. If it's Michaelis or Matz, you've seen a year of that already from both of those guys, and even maybe a little bit longer in the case of Matz. You don't need to give him that extra chance to beat the dead horse. If they're doing well, by all means, keep him in the rotation. That's the best case scenario because you can never have too much pitching. But if that version of pitching that you have is just more of what you saw from that duo in 2024, I think this is a year, unlike last year, unlike any year previous, where the Cardinals have to be willing to do things a little bit differently in the way they operate. Which is like, yeah, give the chance to a younger player. Like Pallante. Like, if he's healthy, that's somebody who could conceivably be in your rotation in 2026. Why spend a moment kind of screwing that guy over if you can avoid it? And if you have to screw somebody over, hopefully you don't. Hopefully it works itself out. But if you had to, it's probably a guy that's not going to be on your team next year. That would be the way I would do it if I were actually prioritizing transition year, making sure the future is ready to roll. Let me know your thoughts on this, Cardinals fans, in the comments below if I'm off base on this at all. And again, I'm not going to defend it if Pallante goes through the spring and he clearly doesn't have it. I think it's too early to say that about anybody. And I'll give credit where it's due. I think Matz has looked solid. I think he looks healthy enough to be able to, like, we've seen good things out of Matz at times. It's just been like catching lightning in a bottle because it's infrequent that he's healthy enough for long enough of a period of time to take advantage of it. So we'll see if he's able to do that this year. And if he is, Cardinals will be better for it. If Michaelis can revert back to some of the stronger years he's had in St. Louis, the Cardinals in 2025 will be better for it. There's no doubt about this. But I also think be careful about kind of casting aside somebody that actually could be, if you build their confidence up appropriately, somebody that can help carry you for the next few years in a role. and could be in that rotation. Again, this wasn't Katie's prediction that Pallante's missing the rotation. Like, she's just kind of saying, hey, here's the way that I see it. And I trust her judgment. I don't necessarily think she's wrong because she knows as well as any of us do that the Cardinals do things in a certain way. And Steven Matz is probably going to be in that rotation. Now, if his performance is lesser than Pallante's in spring, I would make a case for that to go differently and for Pallante and McGreevy to both be in there at the expense of Matz. But because we haven't seen the Cardinals act that differently just yet, it's kind of like a believe it when I see it, that they're going to take a guy who they're already paying and cast him aside a week early, a start early. More than likely, it'll be 2 months late when we go, all right, we've seen it. We've seen it for months. And then after everybody has almost stopped with the pleading, think Taylor Motter, think Brandon Crawford, then they'll do it. And you're like, well, it's kind of a little bit too late now. You're 10 games under 500. Hopefully that doesn't happen. I'll be hoping to see both Michaelis and Matz do well. It's their contract situation and their numbers from last year that shed more of a light on it under the guise of, hey, this is a transition year. I think it's natural to talk about those spots. But that's not going to be the case going into March 27th, nor do I think it should be. Those guys should be in the opening day rotation. Let April play out. See if attrition comes for you, if injuries happen, if struggles from those players happen, and then take stock of what you have in AAA. But leave Pallante's confidence out of this. I wouldn't be. And look, clearly he's a guy that's been to the bottom. They had to send him down, and he had to emotionally deal with the struggles that he had because he pitched poorly last year. But then he picked himself up by the bootstraps and turned himself into a really sturdy starter. And the Cardinals could use a guy like him. And he's under team control for beyond this year. So, yeah, if you're in a transition year where you're starting to bridge the transition to what's going to be in the future, prioritize those guys rather than the guys that you're going to end up leaving in the past. That's my opinion. Let me know yours, Cardinals fans, as we continue to march toward the regular season of St. Louis Cardinals baseball. It's just around the corner. Make sure you guys are subscribed, locked and loaded here on my YouTube channel, Brenden Schaeffer, St. Louis Cardinals writer. In the video description, you'll find a link to the Discord where conversation is ramping up surrounding the Cardinals. There's also a lot of other local sports team conversations in there as well, fantasy football talk, but primarily it'll be Cardinals-centric throughout the summertime. And Sports Hub STL. I'm doing a lot of shows for that channel, for that new startup. So if you guys are interested in more Cardinals coverage, please do support that new endeavor. Been working a lot, working hard on that. So thank you guys so much. And by the way, if you want to support this YouTube channel and all the work that I do, video description has a link to join my YouTube membership. You can do that at the link below. Thank you guys so much for listening, for supporting, for always being there for me. Getting a little gushy here, a little mushy. All right, we're going to leave. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.